understanding never. The lodge is supported by three grand pillars: wisdom, strength and beauty. Again, the references are not to the external meeting place, but to a triplicity of properties resident in the individual soul, which will become increasingly manifest in the aspirant as he progresses and adapts himself to the Masonic discipline. As is written of the youthful Christian master that he increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man, so will it also become true of the neophyte Mason who aspires to mastership. He will become conscious of an increase of perceptive faculty and understanding. He will become aware of having tapped a previously unsuspected source of power, giving him enhanced mental strength and self-confidence. There will become observable in him developing graces of character, speech and conduct that were previously foreign to him. The floor, or groundwork of the lodge, a checkerwork of black and white squares, denotes the dual quality of everything connected with terrestrial life and the physical groundwork of human nature, the mortal body and its appetites and affections. The web of our life is a mingled yarn, good and altogether, wrote Shakespeare. Everything material is characterized by inextricably interblended good and evil, light and shade, joy and sorrow, positive and negative. What is good for me may be evil for you. Pleasure is generated from pain and ultimately degenerates into pain again. What it is right to do at one moment may be wrong the next. I am intellectually exalted today and tomorrow correspondingly depressed and benighted. The dualism of these opposites governs us in everything, and experience of it is prescribed for us until such time as, having learned and outgrown its lesson, we are ready for advancement to a condition where we outgrow the sense of this checkerwork existence and those opposites cease to be perceived as opposites, but are realized as a unity or synthesis. To find that unity or synthesis is to know the peace which passes understanding, that is, which surpasses our present experience, because in it the darkness and the light are both alike, and our present concepts of good and evil, joy and pain, are transcended and found sublimated in a condition combining both. And this lofty condition is represented by the indented or tessellated border skirting the black and white checkerwork, even as the divine presence and providence surrounds and embraces our temporal organisms in which those opposites are inherent. Why is the checker floor work given such prominence in the lodge furniture? The answer is to be found in the statement in the third-degree ritual: the square pavement is for the high priest to walk upon. Now it is not merely the Jewish high priest of centuries ago that is here referred to, but the individual member of the craft. For every Mason is intended to be the high priest of his own personal temple and to make of it a place where he and deity may meet. By the mere fact of being in this dualistic world, every living being, whether a Mason or not, walks upon the square pavement of mingled good and evil in every action of his life, so that the floor cloth is the symbol of an elementary philosophical truth common to us all. But, for us, the words walk upon imply much more than that. They mean that he who aspires to be master of his fate and captain of his soul must walk upon these opposites in the sense of transcending and dominating them, of trampling upon his lower sensual nature and keeping it beneath his feet in subjection and control. He must become able to rise above the medley of good and evil, to be superior and indifferent to the ups and downs of fortune, the attractions and fears governing ordinary men and swaying their thoughts and actions this way or that. His object is the development of his innate spiritual potencies, and it is impossible that these should develop so long as he is overruled by his material tendencies and the fluctuating emotions of pleasure and pain that they give birth to. It is by rising superior to these and attaining serenity and mental equilibrium under any circumstances in which for the moment he may be placed, that a Mason truly walks upon the checkered groundwork of existence and the conflicting tendencies of his more material nature. The covering of the lodge is shown in sharp contrast to its black and white flooring and is described as a celestial canopy of divers colors, even the heavens. If the flooring symbolizes man's earthy sensuous nature, the ceiling typifies his ethereal nature, his heavens and the properties resident therein. The one is the reverse and the opposite pole of the other. His material body is visible and densely composed. His ethereal surround, or aura, is tenuous and invisible, save the clairvoyant vision, and like the fragrance thrown off by a flower. its existence will be doubted by those unprepared to accept what is not physically demonstrable, but the Masonic student, who will be called upon to accept many such truths provisionally until he knows them as certainties, should reflect, I, that he has entered the craft with the professed object of receiving light upon the nature of his own being, 2, that the order engages to assist him to that light in regard to matters of which he is admittedly ignorant, and that its teachings and symbols were devised by wise and competent instructors in such matters, and, 3, that a humble, docile and receptive mental attitude towards those symbols and their meanings will better conduce to his advancement than a critical or hostile one. The fact that man throws off, or radiates from himself, an ethereal surround or covering is testified to by the aureoles and halos shown in works of art about the persons of saintly characters. The unsaintly are not so distinctified, not because they are not so surrounded, but because in their case the aura exists as but an irregularly shaped and colored cloud reflecting their normal undisciplined mentality and passional nature, as the rain clouds reflect the sunlight in different tints. The aura of the man who has his mentality clean and his passions and emotions well in hand becomes a correspondingly orderly and shapely encasement of clearly defined form and iridescence, regularly striated like the colors of the spectrum or the rainbow. Biblically, this aura is described as a coat of many colors and as having characterized Joseph, the greatest of the sons of Jacob, in contrast with that patriarch's less morally and spiritually developed sons who were not distinctified by any such coat. In Masonry the equivalent of the aureole is the symbolic clothing worn by provincial and Grand Lodge officers. This is of deep blue, heavily fringed with gold, in correspondence with a deep blue center and luminous circumference of flame. His ministers are flames of fire. Provincial and Grand Lodge officers are drawn from those who are past masters in the craft, that is, from those who theoretically have attained sanctity, regeneration and mastership of themselves, and have become joined to the Grand Lodge above where they shine as the stars. It follows from all this that the Mason who seriously yields himself to the discipline of the order of is not merely improving his character and chastening his thoughts and desires. He is at the same time unconsciously building up an inner ethereal body which will form his clothing, or covering, when his transitory outer body shall have passed away. There are celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial ... and as we have borne the image of the earthly we also shall bear the image of the heavenly. And the celestial body must be built up out of the sublimated properties of the terrestrial one. This is one of the secrets and mysteries of the process of regeneration and self-transmutation, to promote which the kraut was designed. This is the true temple building that Masonry is concerned with. The apron being the Masonic symbol of the bodily organism, changes and increasing elaborateness in it as the Mason advances to higher stages in the craft symbolize, in theory, the actual development that is gradually taking place in his nature. Moreover, as in the outer heavens of nature the sun, moon and stars exist and function, so in the personal heavens of man there operate metaphysical forces inherent in himself and described by the same terms. In the makeup of each of us exists a psychic magnetic field of various forces, determining our individual temperaments and tendencies and influencing our future. To those forces have also been given the names of sun, moon and planets, and the science of their interaction and outworking was the ancient science of astronomy, or, as it is now more often called astrology, which is one of the liberal arts and sciences recommended further to the study of every Mason and the pursuit of which notes on belongs in particular to the fellow craft stage. The positions of the officers of the lodge. The 7 officers, 3 principal and 3 subordinate ones, with an additional minor one serving as a connecting link with the outside world, represent servant aspects or faculties of consciousness psychologically interactive and coordinated into unity so as to constitute a just and perfect lodge. As a man, any one of whose faculties is disordered or uncoordinated, is accounted insane, so a lodge would be imperfect and incapacitated for effective work if his functional mechanism were incomplete. 7 is universally the number of completeness. The time periods of creation were 7. The spectrum of light consists of 7 colors, the musical scale of 7 days, our physiological changes run in cycles of 7 years. Man himself is a sevenfold organism in correspondence with all these, and the normal years of his life are 7 multiplied by 10. The master, or chief officer, in man is the spiritual principle in him, which is the apex and the root of his being, and to which all his subsidiary faculties should be subordinate and responsive. When the master's gavel knocks, those of the wardens at once repeat the knocks. When the divine principle in man speaks in the depth of his being, the remaining portions of his nature should reverberate in sympathy. Without the presence of this divine principle in him, man would be less than human. Because of its presence in him, he can become more than human. By cultivating his consciousness of it, he may become unified with it in proportion as he denies and renounces everything in himself that is less than divine. It is the inextinguishable light of a master mason which, being immortal and eternal, continues to shine when everything temporal and mortal has disappeared. The senior warden, whilst the master's chief executive officer, is his antithesis and opposite pole. He personifies the soul, the psychic or animistic principle in man, which, if unassociated with and unillumined by the greater light of the spirit or master principle, has no inherent light of its own at all. At best he in the West can but reflect and transmit that greater light from the East, as the moon receives and reflects sunlight. Wherefore in Masonry his light is spoken of as the moon. In nature, when the moon is not shone upon by the sun, it is invisible and virtually non-existent for us. When it is one of the most resplendent of phenomena. Similarly, human intelligence is valuable or negligible according as it is enlightened by the master light of the divine principle, or merely darkly functioning from its own unillumined energies. In the former case it is the chief executive faculty or transmitting medium of the supreme wisdom, in the latter it can display nothing better than brute reason. Midway between the master light from the east and the moon in the west is placed the junior warden in the south, symbolizing the third greater light, the Sunday, and, Masonically, the sun stands for the illuminated human intelligence and craft understanding, which results from the material brain-mind being thoroughly permeated and enlightened by the spiritual principle. It denotes these two in a state of balance and harmonious interaction, the junior warden personifying the balance point or meeting place of man's natural reason and his spiritual intuition. Accordingly, it is he who, as representing this enlightened mental condition, asserts in the second degree, which is the degree of personal development where that condition is theoretically achieved, that he has been enabled in that degree to discover a sacred symbol placed in the center of the building, and alluding to the GGOT. What is meant is, of course, that the man who has in reality, and not merely ceremonially, advanced to the second degree of self-development has now discerned that God is not outside him, but within him and overshadowing his own building or organism, a discovery which he is thereupon urged to follow up with fervency and zeal so that he may more and more closely unify himself with this divine principle. This, however, is a process requiring time, effort and self-struggle. The unification is not achieved suddenly. There are found to be obstacles, enemies in the way, obstructing it, due to the aspirant's own imperfections and limitations. These must first be gradually overcome, and it is the eradication of these which is alluded to in the sign of the degree, indicating that he desires to cleanse his heart and cast away all evil from it, to purify, meaning himself for closer alliance with that pure light. It is only by the sunlight, this newly found illumination, that he has become able to see into the depths of his own nature, and this is the sun which, like Joshua, he prays may stand still and its light be retained by him until he has achieved the conquest of all these enemies. The problem of the much discredited biblical miracle of the sun standing still in the heavens disappears when its true meaning is perceived in the light of the interpretation given by the compilers of the Masonic ritual, who well knew that it was not the solar orb that was miraculously stayed in its course in violation of natural law, but that the sun in question denotes an enlightened perceptive state experienced by everyone who in this valley of Ajalon undertakes the task of self-conquest and fighting the battles of the Lord against his own lower propensities. We have now spoken of the senior and junior wardens and their respective psychological significances and as being described as the moon and Sunday in this connection.